green. So, okay, so this video I just want to go over some policies for consumption externalities, and this is policies to internalize it. So I might just pull the curtain up so that you can see the board a bit clearly. All right. Okay, so hopefully there's still a bit of a glare there. Perhaps come and talk to me if you can't quite see it. So I do have two models on the board. You probably can't see the positive externality model clearly, but if you just look at the consumption externality for petrol, draw up in your books if you're watching this, a negative consumption externality model, right, showing MESB below MB, right, and MEC equaling MC. You could draw as I'm showing you this. So if you wanted to internalize the externality and remove the deadweight loss that's shaded red, all right, and make MESB achieve MB or achieve the social equilibrium of QS, here's some ideas on how to do this. What I would say for if you're thinking about your report, is choose something that you can show it. You have to be able to show it on a model. So you might have some policies that you think, oh, I'd like to do this. But if you can't explain it in terms of efficiency, remember allocative efficiency, removing deadweight loss or equity, then you need to choose something else. You also need to choose something that you can show on a model. So a very obvious choice, and I do recommend it because it's not too difficult. It probably will help you for your external exams, to be honest, as well, is if this is negative externality of consumption, a price control. So it doesn't matter if it's a positive or negative externality. One way to achieve your goal of QS is to change the price. So if we're looking at a negative externality of consumption, we want to increase the price. That's just a given. You want to reduce consumption of a good because it's overconsumed in the private market. One way to do that that's usually quite effective is to increase the price. If it's a positive externality of consumption, then it would be the reverse. You need to reduce the price to increase consumption. So possible policy, change the price. There are a couple ways to do this with a negative externality of consumption. So this is petrol, but it could be alcohol, cigarettes, fatty foods, sugar sweetened beverages, an indirect tax. So you can put a tax on the market. Now, excise taxes are taxes for goods that are considered to have externalities or demerit goods. So you could call it that, you could call it a levy. So if you put an indirect tax on the market, that's actually what this model shows here. So we want to achieve QS. To do that, we could charge a price of PS because that will reduce consumption from Q to QS. And to achieve PS, we can put a tax, an indirect tax on this market, which is the difference between PS and PP. And that means that the consumers pay a higher price. The producers of this good get a lower price, PP, which reduces their incentive to produce it. And therefore, the consumption drops to QS. So the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded fall to QS. And the total amount sold decreases from 0 to Q to 0 to QS. And by doing that, we achieve the social equilibrium of MESB equals MEC, which is at point A. And that would fully internalise this externality. It also creates revenue, PS, A, D, and PP, that a really good thing to argue is the government could use that to educate people about not using petrol and taking public transportation instead, or they could put it into the general tax. Well, there are many things that you can do. I'm not going to get into it now, but one policy for a negative externality consumption is to up the price. One way to do that is to put an indirect tax on the market, and that's a quite easy thing to show, so I would recommend it if you're a bit stuck. You could do a price floor, all right, or a minimum price. That is one way to go about this. So just say, right, the price for petrol now needs to be PS. So you have a mandatory legal price, and you say that's what the price is going to be. You can do it. It's definitely a policy. You could also rip it apart in terms of price controls generally create black markets. They create, in this case, a surplus of petrol. Technically could create a surplus because you're giving a higher price to producers instead of a tax which reduces the price. So you can do a minimum price control or a price floor. It's a possibility. It's a bit old-fashioned, but you could do it. It would still if you did it, it could internalise the externality properly, but I think you'll find it will create more problems black market, surplus stock. So it would require further intervention. Another way that we talked about in class is you could put in a quota, all right? And I won't show it because this diagram is already quite messy. To increase a price, one way that is effective is to limit the quantity that can be sold to QS. So you say there's a quota in this market, so you do a straight line up and you write quota, and what that does is restricts the quantity from Q to QS, so it achieves social equilibrium. You reduce consumption because the government says you can only consume 0 to QS. That's it, there's a limit. When you restrict quantity, that usually pushes up the price. So it pushes up the price because we know that at QS, consumers are prepared to pay PS. The marginal utility of QS is A, the price of PS. So producers know that consumers would pay more at a lower quantity available. Also, in practical terms, if there's a limited amount of alcohol out there, then those who want to consume it are going to bid up the price to be able to get that limited supply. So usually a quota is also another way of increasing the price, and it has the same effects on efficiency as a minimum price control, except that you've just restricted the quantity, not the price. Same story though that I talked about before. If there's an externality in the market, we do argue there is no dead weight loss. I do think though it's not as efficient, the quota. How are you going to police that and make sure that people only sell 0 to QS? So I think it could be, on practical terms, not an easy one. Some other policies is regulation. So we talked about plastic bags, plastic straws and stuff like that, is to ban it. A lot of people are quite interested in this policy. It's quite popular, but they're like, I don't know how to show it. So if you just come to this model here, I'm not again going to draw it because it's going to get crazy. But how you would show that is you would decrease NB to 0. So you'd put maybe a 0 here and you'd have an arrow pointing all the way to here, and you would explain that NB will decrease to 0. Also NC, or NEC, because NC will decrease to 0. Because it's banned, you can't supply it, you can't consume it, so there's no demand and there's no supply. So both will decrease to 0, and you can show that with an arrow towards 0 and then explain it in your writing. Would fully internalize externality because there's no market, there is no externality in that market anymore. So that could be good. Another one is to restrict or control the input. So we talked about sugar sweetened beverages or fatty foods. You can make producers change their ingredients, limit what, like there might be certain ingredients they're not allowed to use. I'm not a biologist or chemist, so I'm not going to name stuff, but the sugar content could be reduced to a limited percentage, or the fat content. If you make them change their ingredients and like remove certain chemicals, that could increase their costs, which could decrease MC or decrease supply. They could decrease supply because they don't want to supply it anymore because it's too expensive to make, and then rather make a related good that's not subject to the same regulations. Possibly you might decrease the demand for the product if people don't like the taste of the new product, like they don't actually like the lower content of sugar or fat sort of thing. I'm not sure about that. It might decrease the spillover. I put here SOC. SOC, I mean spillover costs. If you're restricting the sugar or fat content in like sugar sweetened beverages or like foods, fatty foods, then that would reduce the spillover cost, so that would decrease MSB. What it would do is it would make MSB closer to MB. The gap between the two would get smaller because your spillover costs are smaller, because the spillover cost comes from the consumption of the sugar or the salt, fat in fatty foods. So if there's less of it, then there's likely to be less of a spillover cost. So that's a possibility. You might also reduce the demand because they don't like the product anymore, maybe. Another one, if you're looking at alcohol cigarettes, is age restrictions. So you could show that by decreasing MB. So just remember, when you decrease demand, you're showing a decrease in MB. That sort of should be semi-obvious. If you make it over 18 or over 20, you're cutting out some of the consumers in the market. So market demand, or demand is the total of all individual quantity demanded at each and every price. So if there's less consumers, there's less overall demand, so NB would fall. So that's a possibility, and we do that for alcohol and cigarettes already. So you could talk about an existing policy in effect. and maybe talk about it in relation to a minimum price control. That's quite popular for alcohol, or a quota, or an indirect tax. Compare the two. And in terms of this is sort of, we got a bit crazy here. The black is the negative consumption externalities. Another possibility is an education campaign, advertising. So here at Onslow, you might remember that attitude. There's an attitude presentation for each year level. And basically that's the government funding a group to come in and talk to you about things like don't drink so much, smoking is bad, don't do drugs. So when you do education campaigns like that, the idea is to decrease the demand for a product or an activity that we don't think is good. So in this case, fatty foods, sugar sweetened beverages, energy drinks, petrol, smoking, alcohol. If we educate you that it's not good for you and that it's better for society if you consume less, there's the theory, the idea that you'll decrease your demand for it, and therefore it'll decrease the marginal benefits, which would mean you would get closer to QS. I guess if you did a really good job, you would decrease NB to equal MSB. As a certain person in the class pointed out, cynically, he believes that people already know it's bad for you, they'll still keep on consuming it. So educational advertising campaigns, I think you can kind of argue it has a limited effect. It costs a lot to do that. Will it actually achieve the result of internalising the externality? Probably not. Might get close to, but not entirely. The other one we talked about is incentives, changing incentives. So this is a negative externality. It's a negative product. We want you to reduce consumption. So let's make you want to consume more of something that is good. So we talked about good versus bad goods. So you could try and make the substitute, the better good, the good, more attractive. Make people switch their demand from petrol to public transportation. People switch their demand from fatty foods, we talked about pies, to healthier foods like bananas. And so decrease the demand, NB decreases, all right? Maybe not all the way, but closer to MSB. And you could do another graph showing the demand for the healthier, the better alternative increasing. And some of the ways that we came up with this is like with car registration. Apparently this actually is the case, that if your car's older than 2004, your registration is more expensive. You might have a higher ACC levy. You have to do a warrant of fitness every 6 months. You have the idea of maybe reducing the GST on fresh fruit and vegetables, or making it no GST on fresh fruit and vegetables, or giving a subsidy for fresh fruit and vegetables. You could show that, so you could show a subsidy or a tax removal on the good product, which is fresh fruit and vegetables, and then show how that affects the demand for fatty foods that contribute to obesity. So it would decrease the demand. So that's kind of like, it's not as direct in terms of the externality market, but we call it kind of like punishing policies, punish you for using the bad product and reward you for using the good product. It could be about making the good product more affordable. Okay, so carrot versus the stick. So those are negative externality policies. Very quickly, positive consumption externalities, the reverse. So something to do with the price, put a subsidy on it. You could do a price ceiling, or did the price roof. I don't think it's an actual name, which is a maximum price that could decrease the price to make it more affordable, and then increase consumption, which achieves QS. You could provide the goods, so the government could provide the goods for education, public schools, for free. How you show that, I'm thinking like an increase in supply, a decrease in marginal cost, because the government's stepping in as another producer, or it could be like a full subsidy, the difference between the private cost of the product and zero. The government fully subsidises the use of this product, like free tertiary education. I'm thinking more the government would step in as the producer and increase supply until it's at the social quantity and the social price. You can, again, a popular one for me, educate, advertise people that they should eat healthy foods. You could use electric cars. So let's advertise and educate the population to drive electric cars and to do the right thing. That would increase marginal benefit or increase the demand for the positive externality of consumption. So let's try and do a public campaign that vaccinations are good and you should use them. Let's do a public campaign that you should have solar panels, insulate your house, and therefore would increase the demand for the product, which reduces the difference between MB and MSB. We talked about the carrot and the stick, so make the bad product less attractive and make the good product, the externality, the positive externality, more attractive. Okay, the carrot versus the stick approach. So that's just a rundown of probably, I would say, the likely policies that you could use and how you would show them on a model. Any questions or you want me to actually sketch it out for when we have a go at it together, come in and see me, but maybe watch this again and try and do that for yourself. Thanks.